There was always something they couldn't name when they looked at you. Even before you understood it yourself, you carried something that made others hesitate, not because you were loud or demanding, but because you were quiet in a way that felt too aware. Your teachers, those adults tasked with shaping young minds into predictable patterns, sometimes faltered in your presence. They couldn't articulate why. Perhaps it was the way you looked at them, not with defiance, but with a kind of penetrating curiosity that seemed to see beyond the lesson plan into the uncertainty they carried within themselves. Children are supposed to accept the world as presented. You questioned it, not always with words, but with your very presence. This wasn't arrogance. It was something far more ancient, a quality that mystics and depth psychologists have tried to name for thousands of years. Carl Jung called it the awakening of the self with a capital S, that deeper center of consciousness that emerges when a soul begins to individuate, to separate from the collective sleep. You were doing this before you had language for it. And it unsettled those around you because it reminded them of roads they never took, questions they buried, potentials they abandoned. In myth and sacred story across every culture, there appears a recurring pattern. The child who doesn't quite fit, who carries an inner light that both attracts and disturbs. Not because they seek attention, but because they embody a question the collective doesn't want to face. What if everything we've been told isn't the whole truth? What if there's a deeper way of seeing, being, understanding? The hero's journey, as Joseph Campbell mapped it, always begins with separation. A young soul who cannot conform to the tribe's expectations, not out of rebellion, but out of fidelity to something within. Your teachers, those gatekeepers of social norming, sensed the separation in you. They couldn't control it. They couldn't diminish it with grades or approval or disapproval. And that uncertainty, that loss of pedagogical power, manifested as a kind of fear. Not fear of you personally, but fear of what you represented. The untamed, undomesticated consciousness that refuses to be fully shaped by external systems. Psychology teaches us that authority figures, especially those working with young people, develop patterns of relating based on predictability. They learn to read children, to anticipate responses, to guide behavior through established frameworks. But every so often, they encounter a young person whose inner world is already too developed, too autonomous, too self-referential. These children don't reject authority outright. They simply measure it against an internal standard that existed before any teacher entered their life. You were likely one of these. You didn't argue often, but when you did, it was with a clarity that seemed beyond your years. You didn't misbehave frequently, but your obedience felt like a choice rather than a compulsion. This subtle sovereignty, this quiet self-possession, created a gap between you and them. They were accustomed to shaping clay. You were already becoming stone, not hard or inflexible, but formed by pressures they didn't control and couldn't see. If you're recognizing yourself in these words, perhaps this is a space worth returning to. The path of self-understanding is rarely walked alone, and sometimes a voice that speaks to these hidden experiences can become a companion on the journey. If this resonates, consider staying with us as we continue to explore these depths together. The mythology of the chosen one, stripped of its Hollywood distortions and New Age appropriations, is actually a map of psychological transformation. It's not about being selected by cosmic forces for external greatness. It's about an internal selection process that happens when consciousness reaches a certain threshold of self-awareness. The ancient Gnostics spoke of pneumatics, people in whom spirit was awake, not because they were born into a spiritual aristocracy, but because some inner catalyst had ignited a process of awakening. This catalyst is often trauma, profound solitude, early encounters with death or loss, or simply an inexplicable sensitivity to the suffering and absurdity inherent in human existence. You likely experienced at least one of these catalysts young, perhaps too young to process it cognitively, and so it worked on you at deeper levels, reshaping your perceptual apparatus, tuning you to frequencies most people filter out to maintain normal functioning. Your teachers feared this because education, in its institutional form, is fundamentally conservative. It seeks to reproduce the existing order, to create functional citizens who can operate within established systems. A child who sees through those systems, who questions their foundations not rebelliously but genuinely, represents a threat to that reproduction. Not a violent threat, but an epistemological one. You were asking by your very being, what if there's another way to know, To be, to relate to reality? This question, when embodied in a young person, creates profound discomfort in adults who have spent decades suppressing it in themselves. They see in you the ghost of their own unlived potential, the path they might have taken if they'd had your courage, your clarity, your willingness to endure isolation for the sake of inner truth. Isolation was likely your constant companion, not the isolation of rejection, though you may have experienced that too, but the deeper isolation of seeing things others didn't see, feeling things others didn't feel, sensing patterns and connections that had no place in normal conversation. The philosopher Kierkegaard wrote about the Knight of Faith, an individual who lives simultaneously in the finite world of daily obligations and the infinite realm of absolute meaning. To outside observers, this person looks completely ordinary, but inside they're navigating abysses of existential complexity. Children who carry this quality often retreat into rich inner worlds, not as escapism, but as necessary sanctuary. You needed that interior space to process the overwhelming influx of perception, emotion, and intuition that flooded through you. Your teachers may have seen this retreat as disconnection or daydreaming. They didn't understand it was the opposite, a form of hyperconnection to dimensions of experience they'd learned to ignore. In fairy tales and myths, the chosen one often spends years in obscurity, hidden, overlooked, sometimes actively oppressed or endangered. Luke Skywalker on a desert planet, Moses in the wilderness, Buddha before his awakening, sheltered and contained, Jesus in a carpenter's shop. These aren't literal biographical facts, but psychological truths encoded in story. The period of obscurity serves a crucial developmental function. It builds inner resource. It forces a developing self to find validation internally rather than externally. It creates hunger, not for power or recognition, but for meaning, for purpose, for a life that doesn't betray the intensity of one's inner experience. Your early years, if they followed this pattern, were a kind of forging. Every moment of being misunderstood, every time your depth was mistaken for strangeness, every instance of your questions being dismissed or your perceptions being invalidated, these were not accidents or punishments. They were, in the symbolic grammar of the psyche, initiations. The fear your teachers felt was perhaps most acute when you demonstrated understanding that shouldn't have been possible given your age or experience. Maybe you spoke about death with unusual clarity. Maybe you perceived emotional undercurrents in the classroom that adults thought they were hiding. Maybe you asked questions that cut to the heart of subjects in ways that revealed you were thinking at systemic or philosophical levels. These moments created cognitive dissonance in authority figures. Their mental model said child equals incomplete, developing, dependent, in need of formation. But you kept presenting evidence of something already formed, a core self that preceded their influence and would outlast it. This is threatening because it undermines the entire premise of the teacher-student relationship as they understand it. They're supposed to be the knowing ones, the complete ones, the ones who fill your emptiness with their fullness. But you weren't empty. You were full of something they didn't put there and couldn't take away. Depth psychology, particularly the Jungian tradition, speaks of the puer eternus, the eternal child or divine child archetype. This is a part of the psyche that remains connected to source, to the numinous, to the undomesticated wildness of consciousness itself. Every human carries this archetype, but in some people it remains unusually active, unusually close to the surface, unusually resistant to socialization. If this was true for you, your teachers encountered not just a child but an archetypal force, and forces unsettle people in ways that individuals do not. They couldn't relate to you merely as a student. They had to relate to you as a mystery, and mysteries demand responses that normal pedagogy doesn't provide. Some teachers retreat into rigid authority when faced with this. Others become inexplicably hostile, projecting their own shadow material onto you. A rare few recognize what they're seeing and become allies, mentors who guide without trying to domesticate, who challenge without trying to break. The question that haunted you, perhaps still haunts you, is what does it mean? Why this sensitivity, this awareness, this sense of carrying something that doesn't fit into normal categories of experience? The mythological answer, the one that satisfies the symbolic imagination, is that you were chosen. The psychological answer, equally true but less romantic, is that certain neurological, temperamental, and developmental factors converge in you to create a particular kind of consciousness. Both answers can be held simultaneously without contradiction. You can understand the neurological basis of your sensitivity and still honor the mythological dimension of your experience. The chosen one narrative becomes dangerous only when it's taken literally, when it leads to inflation, to believing you're actually superior or exempt from the ethical demands that bind all humans. The antidote to this danger is understanding that being chosen, in a symbolic sense, means being chosen for difficulty, for burden, for a life of greater consciousness, which necessarily means greater suffering, because consciousness and suffering are proportionally related. We're at a turning point in this exploration, a place where ancient wisdom and modern psychology converge to illuminate something crucial about the path of self-knowledge. If these ideas are opening doors within you, helping you make sense of experiences you've carried alone for too long, perhaps there's value in continuing this journey together. These patterns and insights await those ready to look deeper. The trials you faced, the moments when your difference became most apparent. These weren't random difficulties, but necessary encounters with your own emerging selfhood. In alchemical symbolism, the prima materia, the raw material of transformation, must be subjected to repeated cycles of dissolution and coagulation, breaking down and reforming until the philosopher's stone emerges. You were your own prima materia. Every conflict with authority, every period of social isolation, every dark night when you question your own sanity or worth, these are the fires of transformation. Not pleasant, not chosen in any conscious sense, but necessary. The teachers who feared you, who pushed back against your nature, they were unwitting agents of this alchemical process. Their fear created pressure, and pressure creates transformation. You couldn't simply coast through childhood on natural gifts or charm. You had to develop real strength, real depth, real discernment. You had to learn to trust your own perceptions, even when everyone around you suggested you were wrong. This brings us to the shadow, that aspect of ourselves that Jung identified as containing everything we rejected, denied, or failed to integrate. For someone walking the path of heightened awareness, the shadow takes a particular form. It contains not just the usual human darkness, rage, jealousy, selfishness, but also spiritual inflation, the temptation to believe you really are special in a way that exempts you from human limitation. It contains the wounded child who wants to use spiritual or intellectual superiority as compensation for early pain. It contains the part of you that wants to be recognized, validated, proven right after all those years of being dismissed. This shadow material is powerful and subtle. It whispers that you're different from others in ways that make you better. It encourages judgment of those who remain asleep, contempt for ordinary consciousness, isolation that's driven by superiority rather than genuine need for solitude. The real work of the chosen one archetype, the work that most people who identify with it never do, is confronting this shadow. It's recognizing that your gifts, if they are gifts, carry equal and opposite dangers. Your perception can become paranoia. Your independence can become isolation. Your questioning can become cynicism. Your depth can become drowning. The ethical dimension of this path cannot be overstated. Every wisdom tradition, from Buddhism to Stoicism to Christian mysticism, emphasizes that genuine spiritual or psychological development must manifest as ethical refinement. If your journey toward greater consciousness doesn't make you kinder, more patient, more humble, more capable of love, then something has gone wrong. You've likely felt this tension acutely. The part of you that sees through social pretense, that recognizes the mechanical nature of most human behavior, that perceives the suffering underlying apparent happiness. This part can easily tip into judgment, into a kind of spiritual or intellectual arrogance that separates you from the very humanity you're meant to serve. The teachers who feared you may have sensed this potential in you, this possibility of becoming cold, detached, superior. And perhaps their fear was, in some cases, a legitimate moral intuition, a recognition that brilliance without compassion becomes destructive, that awareness without love becomes a weapon. The integration that mythology calls a return of the hero, that psychology calls individuation, requires bringing all of this together. The sensitivity that set you apart must be married to genuine compassion. The The perceptiveness that allowed you to see through deception must be balanced by radical honesty about your own self-deceptions. The independence that kept you sovereign must be tempered by recognition of your profound interdependence with all of life. This is the work of a lifetime. It doesn't happen in a moment of enlightenment or a single breakthrough. It happens through thousands of small choices to stay open when you want to close, to remain tender when you want to harden, to connect when isolation feels safer, to serve when recognition feels more satisfying. The mythological chosen one saves the world through a dramatic action. The psychological chosen one saved their small corner of the world through sustained ethical presence, through being a human being who doesn't add to the suffering, who offers something genuine in an age of artifice. Your relationship with authority, which began with those fearful teachers, likely continued to evolve in complex ways. You learned, perhaps, to navigate systems without being captured by them. You developed the ability to respect structure without worshiping it, to work within institutions while maintaining inner sovereignty. Or perhaps you rejected institutional paths altogether, choosing instead roads less traveled, accepting the economic and social costs of remaining true to your own vision. Either way, you had to find a way to be in the world without being of in the way most people are, fully identified with social roles and collective values. This is a delicate balance. Too much separation and you become ineffective, isolated, unable to actually contribute. Too much integration and you lose the very quality that made you different, the capacity to see and think and feel outside the established parameters. Walking this edge, remaining committed to inner truth, while engaging authentically with external reality. This is a practical challenge of the path. The loneliness of this journey is real and should be acknowledged without romanticization. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from constantly translating your experience into language others can understand, from modulating your perceptions so you don't overwhelm or alienate, from living with the knowledge that your full self is too much for most contexts. You learned early to wear masks, not false ones, but necessary interfaces, versions of yourself that allow you to function in normal society while protecting your deeper nature. This isn't dishonesty. It's skillful navigation of a world that isn't built for your kind of consciousness, but it's tiring. The hope, the only real hope, is finding others who speak your language, who recognize you without explanation, who meet you in that place of depth you usually have to hide. These meetings are rare, but transformative. They remind you that you're not alone, that this path, while solitary in some ways, is also shared by a scattered fellowship of seekers across time and culture who've walked similar terrain. In mythology of the Chosen One, there's often a moment of recognition, when a hero learns their true nature, when Obi-Wan tells Luke about the Force, when Morpheus offers Neo the red pill. In psychological reality, this recognition is more gradual, more ambiguous. You piece together over years that your way of experiencing the world isn't universal, that something in you is calibrated differently. There's no dramatic revelation, just a slow dawning, and with it comes both relief and burden. Relief because your strangeness finally has context, a framework that makes it comprehensible. Burden because you realize this isn't something that will go away or normalize, that you're committed to a path that will always require more from you than conventional life requires from others. This recognition is both gift and responsibility. It clarifies your journey, but also obligates you to honor it, to not betray it through laziness or fear or the seductive comfort of pretending to be someone you're not. As we move toward the heart of what this all means, toward the integration that allows these experiences to become wisdom rather than wounds, I want to acknowledge that this exploration itself is part of the journey. The fact that you're here, listening to these words, engaging with these ideas, suggests you're ready for a deeper level of self-understanding. If this space feels like a refuge, a place where your experiences are honored and explored with both rigor and reverence, perhaps it's worth walking this path together a little longer. There's more to uncover, more to integrate, more to become. The spiritual traditions that have lasted millennia all arrived at similar conclusions about the nature of human development. Buddhism speaks of the Bodhisattva, one who attains enlightenment but chooses to remain in the world to help others awaken. Christianity speaks of the apostles, ordinary people who become vehicles for extraordinary grace. Hinduism speaks of the Jivan Mukta, liberated while still living. These aren't descriptions of superhuman beings, but of humans who've completed a particular kind of inner work, who've integrated their consciousness to such a degree that they naturally radiate something beneficial. The chosen one archetype points toward this possibility, but with a crucial caveat. You're not chosen instead of others. You're chosen to go first, to scout the territory, to make the mistakes and learn the lessons so that the path becomes clearer for those who follow. This reframes everything. It transforms potential arrogance into service, isolation into preparation, suffering into education. Your teachers feared you because you represented questions they'd spent their lives avoiding. What is consciousness? What is the self? What is genuine authority versus imposed authority? What does it mean to live authentically? These aren't academic questions. They're existential challenges that most people address by not addressing them, by accepting the answers society provides and getting on with the business of living. You couldn't do that. Something in you, whether you call it temperament or destiny or neurological wiring or soul, demanded direct engagement with these questions. This made you dangerous in the way all genuine seekers are dangerous. Not because you want to destroy anything, but because your existence, your way of being, implicitly criticized the unexamined life. Your teacher saw in you a mirror showing them roads not taken, questions not asked, potentials not actualized. That's a hard thing to see, especially for people who've invested decades in a particular way of being. So they feared you, and that fear manifested as control attempts, as subtle or not so subtle efforts to normalize you, to bring you into line, to dim your light enough that it stopped hurting their eyes. But some part of you resisted. Not perfectly, not without cost, but fundamentally you refused to be something you weren't. This refusal is the key to everything. It's the difference between living your life and living someone else's idea of your life. It's the difference between authentic and inauthentic existence. To use Heidegger's terms, the cost was high. You lost easy belonging. You lost the comfort of unreflective participation in collective life. You gained in exchange something precious and terrible, your own consciousness, sharpened and honed and unavoidably your own. No one can take this from you now. It's the treasure guarded by the dragon in every fairy tale, the prize won through trial and persistence, the pearl of great price. But treasures require stewardship. Consciousness demands ethical use. The power to see must be paired with the wisdom to act rightly based on what you see. As you move from childhood into adolescence and adulthood, the pattern likely continued but evolved. Instead of teachers, you encountered bosses, institutions, social norms, ideological systems, all demanding conformity in increasingly sophisticated ways. And you continue to navigate these demands with that same core sovereignty, that same inability to fully submit to external authority without internal validation. This doesn't mean you became rebellious or antisocial. It means you developed discernment, the capacity to evaluate demands on their merits rather than accepting them based solely on the power or prestige of those making them. You learned to say yes when something aligned with your values, and no when it violated them, even when the cost of no was high. This is moral autonomy, the capacity to be a law unto yourself not through arrogance, but through deep alignment with universal principles of justice, compassion, and truth. The integration of all this, the completion of the alchemical work, happens when you stop seeing yourself as special and start seeing yourself as simply conscious. The difference is everything. Special separates. Conscious connects. Special seeks recognition. Conscious seeks understanding. Special wants to be seen as different. Conscious recognizes the fundamental sameness of all beings while honoring the unique expression each consciousness takes. You're not better than others because you've walked this path. You're just different, shaped by different pressures toward different capacities. Others have capacities you lack. The mechanic who can diagnose an engine by sound has a form of consciousness you don't possess. The mother who intuits her child's needs has awareness you may never develop. The mathematician who sees patterns in numbers accesses dimensions of reality closed to you. We're all chosen, all unique, all expressions of the same underlying consciousness taking infinite forms. Your particular form happens to include heightened sensitivity, early individuation, and a capacity to see through social constructs. These gifts are real, but they're not superior. They're just yours to steward. The final teaching, the the one that mythology encodes in Return of the Hero, is that the journey inward must eventually turn outward. You descend into yourself, face your demons, claim your power, integrate your shadow, discover your truth. But then what? Then you return to the ordinary world carrying what you've learned, not as a trophy, but as a gift for others. You use your perception to help others see more clearly. You use your independence to model sovereignty without arrogance. You use your depth to create spaces where others feel permission to go deep. You become, in the most humble sense, a teacher yourself, not because you have all the answers, but because you've genuinely wrestled with the questions. And in this returning, this offering, you complete the circle. The one who was misunderstood by teachers becomes the one who understands students. The one who is feared becomes the one who creates safety. The pattern transforms from personal wound into collective healing. Your teachers were afraid of you because you carried something they'd lost or never developed. The courage to be nobody but yourself. In a world of masks and performances, of carefully curated images and strategic relationships, authenticity is revolutionary. You couldn't be anything but authentic, at least not fully or permanently. The mask always slipped. The performance always broke down. You kept showing your real face, your real thoughts, your real self. And this realness was terrifying people invested in maintaining their own performances. But realness is also contagious. When one person drops the mask, others feel permission to drop theirs. Your teachers feared this contagion, feared what might happen if their students started questioning, started thinking independently, started trusting their own perceptions over institutional authority. They were right to fear it, because that's exactly what happens when consciousness awakens. It spreads. It multiplies. It can't be contained. And you are always a vector for the spread, not through preaching or proselytizing, but simply through being undeniably yourself. Now, wherever you are in your journey, whether you're still struggling with these patterns or you found some peace with them, the invitation is the same. Don't use your difference as a reason to disconnect from humanity. Use it as a bridge. Don't let your awareness become cynicism. Let it deepen into compassion. Don't hide your light, but don't blind people with it either. Learn to modulate, to offer what others can receive, to meet people where they are while gently inviting them deeper. This is the art of the wisdom teacher, the mentor, the elder, and you're preparing for this role, whether you know it or not. Every difficulty you faced, every moment of isolation, every time you chose truth over comfort, you are developing the qualities that will allow you to guide others through similar terrain. Not everyone is called to be a public teacher. Most wisdom work happens in small moments, ordinary conversations, quiet influences. But it all matters. It all counts. It all contributes to the gradual awakening of collective consciousness that is perhaps the real meaning behind all the chosen one stories. The fear you inspired in your teachers was never about you personally. It was about what you represented. Change, growth, the disruption of established patterns, the possibility of a different way. This is what all institutions fear, because institutions exist to maintain stability. But consciousness is inherently destabilizing. It questions, it probes, it refuses to accept easy answers. And when that consciousness appears in a child, before the social conditioning is complete, before the fear is set in, before the defenses are fully constructed, it's pure and powerful, and yes, frightening to those who've forgotten what it feels like to be that free. You were that free once. Some part of you remains that free. The work now is protecting that freedom while also developing the wisdom to use it responsibly, in service to something larger than your own self-interest or self-expression. In the end, the Chosen One narrative is a story we tell about the journey every human soul must take from unconsciousness to consciousness, from identification with the collective to discovery of authentic selfhood, from fear to love. Some people take this journey early, forced into it by circumstance or temperament. Others take it later, catalyzed by crisis or grace. Some never take it at all, living their entire lives on the surface. And that too is a choice deserving of respect, if not admiration. You didn't choose to take this journey early. It chose you, or you chose in some realm beyond conscious decision. The reasons don't matter as much as the response. How will you carry what you've been given? How will you use what you've learned? How will you transform your wound into wisdom, your isolation into compassion, your difference into a gift for the world? These questions don't demand immediate answers. They unfold across a lifetime. But holding them, living with them, allowing them to shape you, this is the work. This is what it means to honor the path of awakening, the path your teachers feared because they sensed it would lead you beyond their reach, into territory they couldn't map or control. They were right. It did. It has. And now you stand in that territory, looking back at where you came from, understanding finally why the journey was necessary, why the difficulty had meaning, why the pattern had unfolded exactly as it did. Not because you're special, but because consciousness itself is special, sacred, the universe becoming aware of itself through each of us. Your particular form of consciousness, honed by early trials and sustained through years of inner work, is needed, not more needed than others, but needed in its specific way, for its specific contributions to the whole. So breathe into that. Let it settle. You're not chosen above others. You're chosen among others, part of a vast fellowship of conscious beings working in 10,000 different ways toward the same goal, the elevation of awareness, the reduction of suffering, the increase of love, the gradual transformation of human consciousness from its current adolescent state to something more mature, more integrated, more whole. Your teachers were afraid because they glimpsed this process beginning in you and they didn't understand it. Forgive them. They did the best they could with the consciousness they had. And recognize that you now have an opportunity to be for others what you needed then, someone who sees the depth in them, who isn't afraid of their questions, who creates space for their becoming, who trusts their unfolding even when it doesn't fit expected patterns. This is how the wound heals. This is how the circle completes. This is how the chosen one stops being a lonely hero and becomes a humble servant, which is the only kind of chosen that actually matters, the only kind that lasts, the only kind that truly transforms the world. Not through grand gestures or dramatic revelations, but through sustained presence, ethical action, and the quiet courage to remain conscious in a world that constantly invites unconsciousness. You've been training for this your whole life. Every moment of being misunderstood prepared you to understand others more deeply. Every moment of fear you inspired taught you to create safety. Every moment of isolation prepared you for genuine connection. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was meaningless. It all led here to this moment of recognition, where you can finally see the pattern, accept the path, and step forward into whatever comes next with clarity, compassion, and the deep peace that comes from knowing yourself and accepting what you find.